Let's wait a few minutes to let the journalists join. Okay, thanks everyone for joining. We will start now with this event is live stream. So welcome to this CAN International Live press briefing. And we will start with two videos, one from our executive director, Tasneem Essop, and the other video by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, supporting the World We Want campaign, which we are launching in this press briefing. So, Mickey, can we start?
The COVID-19 pandemic is having a profound effect on the lives of people. It has also significantly disrupted ongoing efforts to address the climate crisis. But the climate emergency has not stopped. It is becoming more intense, more lethal, and more painful. Meanwhile, rich countries are turning a blind eye. Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments have continued to invest in heavy industry bailouts and fossil fuels, boosting the very cause of the climate emergency instead of tackling it. It is time for all governments to listen to the science, prepare better for extreme events, and protect their citizens from disease and disaster. It is time for all rich countries to submit ambitious climate action plans, which includes financial support to poor countries to achieve climate justice. This is why CAN is launching its Impacts campaign. We will listen to the voices of impacted communities from around the world through short films that they have produced. Join us in our collective push. Repost the stories or share your own. Use the campaign banner, #WorldWeWant, organize your own mobilizations, and most of all, ask your government to protect you and your fellow citizens from climate impacts. It is time to quit business as usual and transform our economies to allow us all to live in the world we want, where we are safe from climate impacts.
We will now hear the message from the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Please go ahead, Miki.
We live in profoundly challenging times. COVID-19 has devastated lives and economies around the world. But it has not stopped the climate crisis. Like the pandemic, global heating is hitting the world's most vulnerable communities hardest. Yet, as is so often the case, those who have done least to cause the crisis are taking the boldest steps to confront it. These stories of urgency and resilience from the front lines of the crisis are essential. They can inspire greater climate ambition around the globe, but only if they are seen. I commend the Climate Action Network for bringing these stories to the world and for giving a greater voice to those who have struggled for too long to be heard. There is much work ahead for the global community to build greater climate justice and resilience as we strive for net zero emissions by 2050. But I remain optimistic. We can achieve the world we want if we work together and leave no person and no nation behind.
Thank you. So thanks again for joining this news briefing to launch the World We Want campaign on climate impacts. This campaign highlights the voices of affected communities and the consequences of inaction on the climate crisis to sustain pressure on the governments to deliver radical climate ambition and protect citizens and build resilience. The campaign is a collective effort by CAN and its partners to widely distribute short films about people fighting on the front lines of the climate emergency. The films were produced locally in different parts of the world by CAN partners and impacted communities themselves. By enhancing awareness about climate impacts, we aim to reach the hearts and minds of the public and broaden our base to put pressure on governments to respond with urgent climate action. We are exactly 2 months away from the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. This year, all countries are expected to update their climate action plans to show ambition in line with the science and to keep warming below 1.5 degrees. In these plans, countries must outline how they will cut emissions and provide the support needed for communities to adapt to the effects of climate change. To date, only 13 countries, representing a mere 3.6% of global emissions, have submitted national climate plans. These are mostly least developing countries who have done the least to cause this crisis. Now big emitters must step up, follow their lead, and submit their plans before the end of the year. The 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly We heard positive signals from heads of states, especially China, but we need to see this in formal nationally determined contributions. We especially want to see big emitters commit to climate finance. This is crucial for equity and fairness. The money which should be spent on compensating those suffering the most from climate change is not a donation or charity. It is the responsibility of those who caused this crisis under the polluter pays principle. Our immediate challenge is to see that the trillions of dollars being spent on economic stimulus packages are not locking in more emissions and continuing business as usual, but are rather putting us on a clean and safe development trajectory. Our panelists today have firsthand experience with the compound crises of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. So without further ado, I will start introducing them. So we will start with Nisreen Al-Saim. Nisreen is a climate activist from Sudan. She is also the chair of Sudan Youth Organization on Climate Change, and she is the UN Secretary General Climate Advisor, the Youth Advisor on Climate Change. We will then hear from Sohanur Rahman. Sohanur is the founder of Fridays for Future Bangladesh. And then we will move to Sarah Diendorf. Sarah is the director of the Environmental Financial Center in California, Oakland. And then we will end our press briefing with Vladimir, who is Vladimir Sliviak, who's the co-chairman of the Russian environmental group Eco-Defense. Nisreen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Hala, and thank you very much, Can, for raising these important issues in these very critical times. Well, my name is Nisreen Al-Saim. I'm the chair of the UN Secretary General Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, and I'm from Sudan. Many countries boast about blending carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050. But I don't think these pledges are proper expression of climate ambition or something to be proud of. For us, living through the climate crisis with continuous impact, this time frame seems too far in the future. We are now in 2020 and the impacts we are feeling are already very severe. Government pledges don't mean much to us. We need concrete action right now. Only 1 month ago, Sudan suffered from unusual and continuous rainfall, which caused floods and flash floods that actually devastated the country. The floods killed more than 150 people. They displaced more than 870,000 others. And it's not over yet. People had to cram together in tents, living like refugees, and now facing the only serious spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. But also waterborne diseases like typhoid, watery diarrhea, and cholera. These floods have described as the worst in Sudan for 100 years ago. The UN declared that 30% of the water samples they collected from 13 out of 18 Sudanese states are severely polluted. More than 10 million people are exposed to waterborne diseases, and 4.5 million are exposed to have carrier insect diseases like malaria, which is already happening in 15 out of 18 states. Climate disasters are destroying our infrastructure and hammering the development, the achievements of the SDGs. They set us back. Today, under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Executive Committee for Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage met. However, these discussions are falling short from delivering anything beyond technical issues. We need such a discussion to pave the way the concrete outcomes, including separate finance mechanism addressing loss and damage. We need innovative funding sources to address. We need separate fund to address loss and damage, including debt relief measures, long-term financing through climate damage tax and on big polluters to meet the needs of the communities. We are disappointingly and many incidents permanently affected by climate crisis. The UK presidency to the COP26 of the UNFCCC must ensure that loss and damage remain one political agenda negotiating on bilateral meetings. It cannot be neglected to a footnote of climate diplomacy and must form the basis for the high-level discussions for equitable and fair climate action. Well, it shouldn't be left to poor communities, which are least responsible for climate crisis, to pay the highest price. Rich countries must step up and held accountable for their historical responsibility and deliver the world we want. One where we are safe from climate impacts. Thank you very much, Nisreen El-Saim.
Thank you very much, Nisreen. We now move to our next speaker, Sohanur.
Yes. Thank you, Hala and Climate Action Network. I am very privileged to join this press conference. So the COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis are interlinked, but in some places in the world, especially coastal areas, people are feeling the climate crisis more. They are losing loved ones, homes, and lands. Amid the COVID-19 crisis, we are hit by super cyclone Amphan. 1/3 of the country was flooded. After 4 months from the cyclone, people in Satkhira coastal area are still marooned and waterlogged. The embankment was broken and salty water came in the people's house and it's still there. It also flooded agricultural lands and affected people's livelihood. People are migrating to big cities. The survivors from Amphan had yet to recover from Cyclone Cedar, Aila, Bulbul, Reshmi, Roanu, and others that had hit the area in previous year. More cyclones are coming and they are becoming more frequent, strong, and people cannot cope and cut their vulnerability. The science is clear. These cyclones are the result of the climate crisis that was fueled by rich industrialized countries. So we are dealing with multiple disasters, the COVID-19 pandemic, cyclone, and deadly floods amid COVID-19 pandemic, you know. Bangladesh is one of the less developed countries and one of the least responsible for the climate emergency. Our contribution to global emission is extremely low. It's only 0.03%. But so how we can a country, underdeveloped country, as a deal with all these crises? Global deals discuss adaptation, but how we can even adapt? The disaster and cyclone which we are facing are so frequent that we don't even have time and capacity to implement adaptation plans and build resilience. Bangladesh is a vulnerable country and very prone to cyclone. At the same time, our shelters are not prepared for pandemic requirements such as social distancing. Rich countries must stop now all fossil fuel production and export, especially coal, and instead compensate us for the loss and damage we are suffering and we will want to enhance our adaptive capacity. You know, Bangladesh Parliament has adopted a motion, it's called planetary emergency. But Germany, Japan, India are still funding coal in Bangladesh. We need to government who are now investing in economic stimulus package to invest in the sustainable recovery and just transition. As it stands now, stimulus package for COVID-19 recovery will have a net negative environmental impact in 16 out of 20 G20 countries, according a recent study. Overall, the G20 economic response to the COVID-19 crisis will reinforce and lock in negative environmental trends, putting the world on a dangerous path to rising emission from fossil fuel. As we speak, the World Bank IMF meeting started today. On August 24, 2020, Bloomberg Green reported that Bangladesh is expecting the World Bank to approve $2 billion in loans to support its ambitious climate adaptation plan. But our young people thinking, I am thinking that climate finance should not be about loans, charity, or donation. This is not just. Climate finance should be about compensation. The polluters must pay, and who caused this crisis have a responsibility to compensate and unconditionally relieve debt for low-income countries who owe trillions of dollars to rich economy to help the recover from ongoing pandemic. We should invest the most vulnerable communities, most affected communities. We also need our own government to step up. It is implementing contradictory some policies. Like last year, after organizing massive climate strike by Fridays for Future, our government declared, I already mentioned, planetary emergency. However, after that, it went ahead and opened 29 new coal power plants funded by rich countries. Bangladesh is positioning itself as a climate adaptation and nature-based solution leaders, and it's now the president of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Bangladesh, as example, is a largest solar home systems, but it is not building ambitious climate plan to NDC. Bangladesh is one of the most electricity deprived nation in the world and has large potential for renewable energy sources, but it is not transitioning to renewables. In last point, we want inclusive participation for young people, women, people with disabilities in decision-making and climate policy development, implementation and monitoring. Bangladesh has Delta Plan 2100 and adaptation did not include us. We cannot ensure transparency, accountability and integrity without the participation of affected communities. We are fighting back, we are striking and making our demands clear. We are not voiceless, but our voices are unheard. Our media is not reporting our strikes, our movement. Young people alone cannot secure the future of the planet. We need solidarity, global solidarity from everyone to change this broken system, especially the media. We want them to focus on coastal people's needs, vulnerability, demands, resilience, adaptive capacity, and their innovative solution, their knowledge. We believe CAN's World We Want campaign can amplify the voice of affected people to achieve justice and hope. The world we want is one where we are safe from climate impact. Climate justice right here, right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohanur. Thanks a lot for that. Now we move to Sarah.
Thank you, Hala, and US and CAN International for having me, and good morning from Oakland, California. California is on fire. We currently have 23 fires burning across the state. For some perspective, in 2020 alone, 16,000 square kilometers have already burned. That's a little less than the size of Kuwait. And our fire season still has at least a month to go, and rain is still at least a month away. Hundreds of thousands have been evacuated, 9,300 structures have burned, and 31 people have died. Estimated costs so far in 2020 are $1.6 billion. For the 9 years before 2020, we had $400 million in fire damage. 2020 has quadrupled the costs of fire compared to the last 9 years. And this is relatively new. 5 years ago, fires like this were rare, and they certainly didn't happen with such frequency and in such size. But starting in 2017 through today, roughly 29,000 square kilometers has burned. 29,000 kilometers. The nation of Belgium is only about 30,000 square kilometers. And since the beginning of 2020, in the last 10 months, we have had over 8,000 fires, large and small. We had one in my neighborhood yesterday. The fires are the worst of it, but the smoke is a close second. In the San Francisco Bay Area, we have had almost 2 months of hazardous air as smoke blows through and often settles in the region for days at a time. On a clear day, I can see almost 40 kilometers from my house. On bad smoke days, I'm lucky if I can see 10 blocks. According to a Stanford University professor, 1,000 died who would not have died if they hadn't been exposed to this terrible air quality. He estimates those 1,000 people died in California from mid-August to mid-September this year because they were breathing in the smoke from all the wildfires across the state. It's worse for people who have COVID. Their very lives and recovery are threatened if they can't afford to buy the air filters and purification systems necessary to keep their indoor air clean. Our homeless population, growing larger by the day because of the COVID-driven economic recession, are even more threatened as they struggle to avoid the air while they live in tents and improvised shacks. California has always had fires, but today they're worse than ever before. The 4 major fires in August and September that surrounded the Bay Area and burned through multiple counties started from what was left of a hurricane in Mexico. The weather front made it this far north, but the rain didn't. Other fires have started by downed power lines and sometimes even careless humans. The largest and most aggressive are driven by fierce winds that accompany our heat waves, which are now hotter than they have ever been before. And when the fires start, they have lots to burn. California still suffers from an exceptional drought that lasted 5 years and ended in about 2016, although some say it never ended and that we're in a mega drought, the likes of which have not been seen in over 400 years. What does this look like on the ground? Whole mountainsides of dead and dying trees litter our forests. Insects that used to be controlled by freezing winters are now reproducing more in the warmer winters and feasting on our trees and weakening their defenses. According to one expert, the trees are like a bunch of matches out there ready to go. So when the fires hit, the fuel load is massive. Couple that with fierce, sometimes hurricane-force winds, and you have a nightmare. In the wind-driven Paradise Fire last year, it burned at a rate of around 80 football fields per minute. How do you run from that? I used to love the wind, but I live in a fire zone. On extremely windy days, we keep an eye on the sky, looking for smoke. On extremely windy nights, we don't really sleep. What does our future look like? Experts expect the number of extreme fire days to jump 20% in just the next 15 years. 4% of the state has burned this year. By 2100, if we do not stop using fossil fuels, fires are projected to increase by almost 80%. If we do not end our reliance on fossil fuels, California's water supply could decrease by 2/3. That means more drought. That means more fuel for fires. 5 years ago, this didn't happen. Now they say in 20 years, the current circumstances will just feel more normal. It's too late to put a stop to it. We can slow it, but we can't stop it now, they say. California is on the forefront of climate action, but unfortunately, California is not the voice of this country. Right now, we have a president who calls climate change a hoax and environmentalists are prophets of doom. On November 3rd, this country will choose between Trump and Biden. On November 4, regardless of who wins, the US will leave the Paris Agreement. Trump will still be president because even if Biden wins, his term won't start until January 20th, 2021. If Trump wins, the climate's only hope is that Congress shifts and is governed by Democrats. But even then, majorities will be slim and climate work will probably be left to our states. If Biden wins, we will likely rejoin the Paris Agreement, but Biden and both parties will still be receiving money from the fossil fuel industry. As climate activists, we will need to pour on the pressure for greater ambition. Today, as the World Bank and the IMF meet, we need to remember that the largest climate denier and the largest contributor to climate change in the world is also the largest financial contributor to the World Bank and the IMF, and has the largest share of voting power. If we're going to end our reliance on fossil fuels and stop investment in projects that threaten our climate, then this dynamic has to change. And the United States will not change until the Western countries turn their back on us. So my demand goes out to the top 10 donors to the World Bank, to Europe, Japan, Australia, and Canada. Stand up to the United States. Stop joining or supporting our wars. Stop supporting or looking away from our aggression. Stop buying our goods. Stop importing our coal and oil. Leave us standing alone, the only country in the world outside the Paris Agreement, and keep us isolated until we rejoin the world's effort to save the climate, end the use of fossil fuels, and deliver the world we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Now we move to our final speaker, Vladimir.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you very much. Let me start with what's going on in Russia. Temperature here is rising 2.5 times faster than in the rest of the world. And our permafrost is melting. Russia's got a lot of infrastructure on permafrost, including oil pipelines and even nuclear plants. And of course, as permafrost melting, we're getting more and more threats, and probably there will be more and more accidents as more permafrost will be melting. Heat waves and forest fires becomes bigger and bigger problem now. Every year there are many forests burning. In well, this year there was 1.6 million of hectares of forest in Siberia burning. That's about, well, that's more than a Greece territory. The last year there was over 2 million of hectares of Siberia burning, and economic damage from rapid climate change estimated today at 8.5% GDP. So obviously climate change is here, and we need to act quickly to prevent like a really catastrophic consequences. But what we can see in Russia today doesn't really look like government really care about climate. People who speak about climate change, who attract attention to climate change, activists, are being harassed in all different ways. In my organization over the last several years been taken to court by government because we've been criticizing using of fossil fuel and other dangerous projects run by government. I mean, we had dozens of court cases. We had 5 criminal cases opened against activists of our organization just last year. And obviously, this is the time when government must think about climate change and about climate action and act quickly. But what we can see in Russia today is that the country moving very quickly, but not to climate action, but to dictatorship. The 5th anniversary of Paris Agreement will be soon, and Russia ratified the Paris Agreement. But at the same time, well, it's still ink on paper. What we can see in Russia is that the energy strategy is still the same. Our country is still planning on to, well, extract, burn, and export more fossil fuel, basically doing business as usual. For example, there is special strategy for the coal industry in Russia. And in this strategy, it's written then through the next decade, the Russian companies are planning to extract 50% more coal compared to today's level. And most of it will go for export. Well, from what we see in Russia, obviously, government just ignoring climate change at all and doesn't do anything. What we need from Russian government is completely reversed energy policy, energy strategy, which we have to stop fossil fuel extraction and export. We have to give main priority to the development of renewable energy, which is currently about 1% in Russian energy balance. We need to give priority to energy efficiency and use every possible step to change our energy system in order to decrease, to cut our greenhouse gases emission. Well, unfortunately, today's Russian policy, well, Russia said it will cut emission 25% below 1990 level, but it's not that many. It's not many people know that after 1991, when Soviet Union collapsed, Russian emission went down greatly, and we are far below 25% emission reduction. So basically, when Russian government says they will cut emission for 25% from 1990 level, they actually mean that emission will grow in the next decade, at least. Russia is in the top 5 of world main polluters. And this is why it's extremely important to get Russia to do climate action, to actually act on climate. And even if we have a very big problem with democracy at the moment in the country, what matters first is the public opinion. As we can see, Russian government doesn't want really to act on climate. It doesn't really think that climate problem is serious enough to start acting on this. And the only power that can change this is public opinion, is when people will start to demand from government to act on climate. And this is why this campaign launched by Climate Action Network today is extremely important. I hope this campaign can help us to create more awareness in Russia, to educate people about climate change, and finally create this public opinion that will force government to start acting on climate. We are in this boat together, and right now this boat sails to disaster, and we need to stop it. And I really would like to ask big mass media to help to develop this campaign, to write more about climate change, because this is what we really need today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vladimir, and thanks for everyone for very powerful interventions. I now open the door for any questions. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? You can also post in the chat. And this event is live streamed. So Mickey, in case there are anyone asking questions in the live stream, please let us know. Okay, I guess there isn't any questions, but thank you very much. We build on what was said by all our panelists, and we call on all countries, and rich governments especially, to follow the lead of least developing countries and submit ambitious climate action plans by the end of the year and start decarbonizing their economies now. We also call on countries to deliver a separate finance mechanism addressing loss and damage, and call on finance institutions and rich countries to shift financial flows from fossil fuels and support countries in developing cleaner economic pathways and invest in plans and policies that build resilience and protect people from climate impacts. Rich government must also invest in economic stimulus packages that secure a just and sustainable recovery from COVID-19 to achieve equity and fairness. Thanks everyone for joining us today, whether here or on the live stream, and looking forward to campaigning together and hopefully reaching the world we all want. Thank you so much.